I was very interested today to receive a fascinating comment from Dougalbird about 20 minutes ago. Like so many people, Dougalbird says, you think you have understood the principle of free speech. Actually, I've said very little about free speech, but you really haven't. I would be happy to explain it to you. The judge in the US case of Brandenburg versus Ohio in 1969 understood free speech, and the principle says that the speaker's intention at the time of the utterance is critical. If it was an expression of sincerely held belief that the presumption is that all is and the First Amendment applies. If the intention is to cause specific individuals to commit serious unlawful act, then that is incitement and punishable in law. It was never proved, nor even claimed that Lucy Connelly had such intention. US law has got this right, UK judges have got it wrong, and to the detriment of our precious freedom of speech. Well, I think Dougalbird is making a quite strange comment, because we, in Britain, we don't fall under American jurisdiction, though Donald Trump has expressed an interest in this case. The Lucy Connelly case, I think at heart, is not about freedom of speech. It's about, or rather, the issue about her release, and why I personally feel so passionately that she should be released, is not about freedom of speech or about what she said or about what she intended. It's about a political culture that has grown lenient towards men like Mike Amesbury, bland, blandishing and strangely blind to the ethical failures within their own ranks of their own rankers, while allowing someone like Connelly to become the lightning rod for our public anxieties about race, hate and harm. And there's no question that she posted something vile. She abrogated her duty as a subject of His Majesty as a citizen when she invoked the prospect of violence against migrant hotels, against people who were vulnerable and who could not fight back. But the disproportionate sentence that she received is better understood as a moral performance by the British state, a symbolic overreaction, not a principled stand. On so many levels, I think her punishment is too severe for the crime, but I think the crime was there nevertheless. And I think while there is an instance of leniency and clemency towards Mike Amesbury, the fact that Lucy Connelly languishes in jail is simply intolerable to a British sense of fair play and a British sense of what is right, and that is the sum of it all. As for free speech, I think it's fascinating. Let's dispose of one canard that free speech means the right to say anything without consequence. No legal system or moral tradition worth its salt has ever truly believed that. Even the American system, as Dougalbird points out, doesn't believe that. Canon law, if you go back to that, for example, makes no room for the freedom to offend if it disturbs unity or derides the church. Canon 1369 allows penalties for expressions that excite hatred or contempt against religion. And it's not specific about Christianity. Even where the faithful are granted the right to speak, it is done with reverence. The Church Fathers, Augustine, Chrysostom, Basil, had no interest in defending polemics for polemic's sake. Augustine reminds us, veritas sine caritate, truth without charity is cruelty. This is not censorship, it's moral architecture. And contrast that with the modern American First Amendment tradition. As a US citizen, Lucy Connelly would likely have been protected. In Brandenburg versus Ohio, the court held that unless free speech is intended to incite imminent lawless action and likely to do so, and that's the second part which is important, it's protected. Now, a noxious tweet, therefore, would probably not suffice. And this leads to the comment by Dougalbird online, you think you understand free speech, but you really haven't. Well, I beg to differ, because I don't think this is about free speech. But having encouraged me to look at free speech, I certainly will, and I'm doing so. So Dougalbird is right at least as far as the American law goes, but British law is more discretionary, more paternal or maternal, and sometimes more punitive. And I think, given the fact that she had pleaded guilty, intent might well have been implicit even in an American court. And that's important. Under the Communications Act of 2003, it's a criminal offence to post something grossly offensive. But this isn't not an objective standard, it's a judicial instinct, a sort of judicial blush test. And Connelly's post was repugnant, certainly, but her conviction rests on the assumption that harm was inherent, not demonstrable. And one suspects that her sentence was amplified by the political context, not the criminal necessity of the fact there were riots. And therefore, in a sense, therefore, anybody who was stirring up that hatred was implicitly worthy of sentencing. Even people who may be now campaigning for Lucy Connelly's release from the sanctuary of political office, some of the things which were said at the time, maybe relying on mistaken statements by Andrew Tate, were nevertheless fiery, and that, I think, is worrying. We should be concerned with justice, but we must ask why leniency for male MPs who speak with glib cruelty in Parliament and maximal punishment in contrast for a misguided councillor's wife on Twitter. Why is there that distinction between the two? As there's a distinction between the man who bashes a constituent in the street because he's in his cups, maybe, or because, in vino veritas, and he only serves 3 nights in prison, whereas Lucy Connelly is expected to serve 31 weeks. Donald Trump's intervention in the Connelly case is not about principle, it's about projection. It's also deeply ironic. This is the same man whose administration cracked down on free speech for foreign students, especially at institutions like Harvard and Tufts. And students protesting about Gaza, for instance, have been met with visa threats and ICE surveillance. So we're left with this delicious hypocrisy. Trump is an absolutist for hate speech in the UK, if it conforms to his nationalist script, but a sensorial hawk at home, free speech but not in my own backyard. He wants liberty for Lucy and silence for Lila, the Palestinian-American student trying to protest peacefully in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Let's not forget, freedom is not license. As Aquinas put it, libertas est facultas voluntatis in bonum. Freedom is the faculty of the will to pursue the good. You can't be free to do evil. If speech doesn't serve the good, it becomes a defamation of freedom, not its fulfillment. UK law, for all its flaws, does reflect this to some extent. It builds in moral constraints. The problem is not the principle, it's the inconsistency with which the principle has been applied. The Connelly case shows the worst of both worlds: moral posturing with punitive fervour, and yet no clear doctrine of rehabilitation, education, or even mercy. I think if you look at patristic attitudes to free speech, speech for the fathers of the church was an ascetic and moral discipline. Augustine, so important now that Pope Leo XIV is in office. Augustine said that speech is governed by caritas. Truth without love, without charity, is cruelty. In Doctrina Christiana, he argues that speech must serve the good of the listener's soul. False teachers are to be refuted, not tolerated in the name of liberty. And John Chrysostom, who of course was fairly negative about people he didn't accept, and was also fairly anti-Semitic, but also is responsible for one of the greatest poetic definitions of Christianity in the liturgy, he frequently warns about the tongue's power to destroy and defends bishops silencing heretics not as tyranny but as pastoral necessity. Speech is not neutral. It either tends towards salvation or it tends towards corruption. Libertas loquendi is conditional upon veritas et caritas. In the United Kingdom, free speech is qualified. The Human Rights Act in 1998, Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, everyone has the right to freedom of expression, but this is subject to restrictions in the interests of national security, public safety, prevention of disorder and crime, protection of health or morals, the reputation or rights of others. In other words, if you are encouraging people to burn property, I think it's very rich of the American president and others supporting him to suggest that that person should be free to continue to say these things. Hate speech laws under the Public Order Act of 1986 prohibits incitement to racial or religious hatred. The Communications Act of 2003, sections 127 and onwards, criminalises grossly offensive online communications. That is relevant to Lucy Connelly's case. Defamation, harassment and terrorist laws all impose further limits. The UK law allows significant discretion to prosecutors and courts in assessing harm, hence why Lucy Connelly's imprisonment for a hateful post is legal, even if it's contested. In the United States, Dugelberg mentioned the Brandenburg versus Ohio case, but there's also the idea of Miller versus California, the idea of defamation, the time, the place, and the manner. Restrictions must be content neutral. Foreign nationals, as we're now seeing from Trump, have fewer protections, especially because of visas. And as a result, Trump's administration can lawfully restrict or revoke visas of foreign students who protest or criticize US policy under immigration and national security grounds. But US citizens, such as Lucy Connelly, if she were being judged in the US, would face no criminal penalty in the US for comparable speech, however vile. Her tweet would likely be constitutionally protected. But the idea of freedom, I think there's a lot to be said for the idea that freedom is only freedom to do good. You can't be free to do harm, and I think we should reflect on that. But at the same time, we must we must be really clear. Who benefits from the current alignment of free speech controversies? Not Connelly, certainly. Not truly. She's become a pawn in a wider cultural war championed by opportunists on the American right who couldn't care less for British legal nuance, and not the British people either, who see this case as a confusion of justice with symbolism and punishment with virtue. The tragedy is not that Connelly was punished. The tragedy is that punishment became a form of public theatre, while systemic values, systemic failures of racism, online radicalisation, political hypocrisy remain completely untouched. And if we are to defend free speech, we should begin by understanding it. It's not the freedom to do harm nor the right to be vile, it's the responsibility to speak in ways that serve the common good, even when that good is uncomfortable, unorthodox, or unpopular. And if we have to jail people for speech, we should do so sparingly, with remorse, and above all with justice that is not politically convenient. And if the jails are now overcrowded, then somebody who presents no threat to our country, somebody who claims to have learnt their lesson, should at least receive the consideration, the clemency that was afforded to a man who bashed up his own constituent. I see the inconsistency between the Lucy Connelly case and the Mike Amesbury case screams out, as nothing else does, about one law for them and another law for us. And that is the inconsistency, that is the hypocrisy, and that is the area where we should be focusing attention. But instead, we've got this strange debate about freedom, which is watertight, I think. Watertight, and it's based in law.